Welcome back to week 5 of Chosen. Can you believe it? We are almost to the finish line.
I know, I can't believe it. And as a reminder, my name's Kylie and this is Micah, and we've had a blast being with you for the past 4 weeks and leading up to this one right here. And this week is quite possibly the week where you may be challenged the most, so just a heads up.
That's right. We're talking about what it looks like to be generous with everything that God has so richly blessed us with. Our time, our talents, and our treasures are gifts from God and deserve to be used accordingly.
And between this message and your Chosen Challenge devotionals, we hope you look at generosity in a new light and lean into how God can use that to make a difference in the world.
I absolutely love hearing from our own people at Northview about how God has moved them to live out their faith. And this week, we get to hear from Ian and Katie McDaniel and their story of how God has moved in their family.
So we have 8 children, ranging from 4 all the way up to 19. Our first 3 are born to us, or I call them bio kids, and then the latter 5 are adopted. Our oldest adopted kiddo is bigger than me, and I will tell you, leading in as he has gotten bigger and older, he's experiencing a lot of challenges from the trauma that he experienced. He came home a lot older than our other adopted kiddos, and really struggling internally with so much, and that has started to come out in anger and unfortunately violence.
He has recently been diagnosed with a diagnosis of reactive attachment disorder, which is basically, in easy terms, is he does not do well attaching to people. He learned that adults are not trustworthy, and he learned that relationships are also not trustworthy.
Parents or adults in general are not safe to him. As long he has to be in control of the relationship to make it feel safe. And that's not what parenting looks like. That's not what loving on him. He doesn't want to be loved on. He just needs his needs. And so if you try to love on him, that's scary to him. So conflict is safe to him. Love is not safe to him. And we've struggled adjusting to that in parenting and figuring out how do we need to be there for him in his struggles and learning a lot as we go. And unfortunately, over time, his behaviors kept getting worse. We engaged counseling, we engaged every resource we could, to the point that I remember very clearly when the phone call I got from Katie, and she was in tears and she said I had to call the police. And I'm at work going, what do you mean you had to call? And we knew things kept getting worse and worse, but it was kind of that breaking point, and that triggered then I think a total of 4 police calls, being removed by the police, being put in acute care, being put in residential care, a whole series of incredibly painful, incredibly tough journey that we've been on with him.
Yeah. There's nothing like having to have your kiddo put in handcuffs and escorted out of your house. I mean, I just sob and sob and sob on our front porch. You don't want people to know that's your real broken life, because it's messy.
Probably one of the most powerful moments in interactions, there's so many with Fabi, is he had broken an iPod, a little music player, no screens or anything, just a little music player, and I had bought 2 because frankly I knew he'd probably break one, and music was a gift for us to be able to give to him, to be able to let him regulate. And so I pulled it out and I said, buddy, I can give you one more chance. And he just stopped. She stopped talking. And he goes, I don't understand. I'm like, oh, I wasn't prepared for that. What do you mean you don't understand? I don't understand why you keep giving things and you keep helping. Why?
Fabi is constantly asking us, like, why do you keep coming back? Why do you choose me out of all the kids? And that's a really, really deep, heart-hurt question. But we will choose him over and over and over again, just like God shows up and chooses to love us.
Right after I graduated from college in 2016, I did not have a lot of money. I know, shocking. I ended up buying my family's minivan for my vehicle because my parents sold it to me for super cheap. It was loyal to me for many years, but it was not the most efficient vehicle. It's what many would call a gas guzzler. So one weekend, I was planning a trip down to St. Louis for a wedding when some friends offered to let me use their Prius for the drive. I would save a good amount of money on gas, and it was definitely a more reliable vehicle. It was a great offer. During that trip, I noticed a few things. I noticed that I was driving more carefully, double checking when I normally would only check once, and giving some extra room when I was parking. I was also being extra cautious with drinks or food that I had brought into the car. I didn't want to spill anything. And when I dropped the car back off to my friends, I was careful to pick up every little thing that I brought with me to try to leave it better than I found it. This was all pretty ironic because I'm definitely not known as the neatest person around. This was all because I was hyper aware that the car was not mine. I didn't own it. I was simply allowed to use it, and I did not want to mess that up. I'm sure you've had a similar experience yourself, a time when someone entrusted you with something, and I'm sure that you were extra careful with that thing as well, right? Have you ever stopped to ask yourself, why? Ultimately, it's because when we feel ownership over something, we believe that it gives us the right to do whatever we want with that thing. But when someone trusts us with something that's theirs, we feel an added weight of responsibility and are extra careful because we don't want to have that feeling of ownership and therefore lose the feeling that we're allowed to do whatever we want. When we are entrusted with something that's not ours, it's called stewardship. We become a steward of that thing, not an owner, but a steward. So what's the point? Why am I bringing this up? Well, I believe that understanding stewardship is foundational for generosity. Did you realize that you've been chosen to be generous? This truth is all over the Bible. God's constantly calling his people to be generous with what they have. In the Old Testament, the nation of Israel is given laws that protect those who are poor among them by the generosity of those with enough. He also constantly reminds us through his word that we're called to be generous and that it's good for us. Here are just a couple examples. Matthew 6:19-21 says this: "Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Here, Jesus is explaining that life is not about getting more and more stuff. All of that is only temporary, so that pursuit is pointless. He also warns us that things that we treasure determine the direction of our heart. If we only store up things on earth, our heart will only be for things here on earth rather than the things of God, which are eternal. What a sad life, but many of us are living this way. Here's another passage I want you to look at. Proverbs 11:24 says, "One person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another person withholds unduly, becomes a poverty." This proverb highlights an irony about generosity. It's easy to believe that the more you have, the less you want. But in reality, the opposite is true. When all you focus on is how much you can get, nothing will satisfy you and you will always be in want. The only way to satisfy your need for more is by giving generously. This creates a healthy detachment between you and your stuff, and it relieves an unhealthy desire for more and more and more. These are just two of many examples in Scripture, but one thing is already crystal clear. God takes generosity seriously. He calls anyone who follows him to be radically generous with their lives. He assures us that the sacrifice that's being made while being generous is nothing compared to the benefit of choosing generosity. He has chosen each and every one of his followers for generosity. It's a fruit that should be obvious in the lives of every believer. Like I said, he takes generosity seriously. But here's an important question. Do you take God seriously? Are you serious about generosity, or are you stingy with what you have? Do you believe God when he tells you that you'd be better off giving instead of receiving, or are you convinced that your possessions will bring you ultimate fulfillment and happiness? Do you actually believe it's necessary for a Christ follower to be radically generous, or do you think you just need to give every once in a while and God will be satisfied? The truth is, God has called his followers to be radically generous with their lives, not just money, but lives. But how do we do this? How can we adopt this mindset of generosity? How can we make generosity not just something we think about every once in a while, but a rhythm in our life? Well, like I mentioned earlier, it all goes back to the concept of stewardship. James 1:16-17 says, "Don't be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows." Here's a humbling truth I want you to hear, but I'll warn you ahead of time that it probably won't be easy to hear. The truth is, you don't own anything. That house you've been making payments on for years, not yours. The car you paid off in 2018, nope. The money in your bank account, not a cent. That unscheduled free time you have planned for this weekend, that's not yours either. And that passion project you've been working on for years, it's not yours. Now, don't get me wrong, you have control over what you're going to do with those things. God has entrusted you with control over them. That's the whole concept of stewardship. Technically, you can waste the money, burn the house, and crash the car if you want. You would still be stewarding those things, just very poorly. But you need to realize that every single one of those things comes from God. Like James said, every good and perfect gift comes from above. He also warns us not to be deceived. Guys, so many of us are deceived. We hold our possessions, money, time, and resources so tightly because we believe they're ours. We earned them, we deserve them, so we are going to do what we want with them. But that's not the case. God has graciously gifted each of us with what we have, and He expects us to be generous with those things. You have been chosen for generosity. When you let this truth sink in, past the head level and down to the heart level, it changes things. The moment we truly realize that everything we have has been entrusted to us, we start treating it differently. Just like the Prius that I borrowed, I was much more careful because I wanted to be a good steward of what I'd been entrusted with. I was constantly asking myself, what would the owner want? What did the owner ask me to do with this car? Do we ask similar questions with our possessions? Questions like, what does God want me to do with this paycheck? How does God want me to use my house? What does God want me to do with my free time today? The moment we realize that it's all His is the moment we can step into generosity in the way God called us to. It's much easier to be generous with something we realized was a gift in the first place. It's then that generosity won't just be something we do at Christmas time. Generosity becomes a part of your daily life. It's a rhythm you live out every single day. You utilize everything you have from a place of generosity. It's not just what you do, it's who you are. This is a beautiful picture, but it's impossible when we cling tightly to everything we have because we think we earn this or we deserve this. So what is it for you? What's something you need to loosen your grip on? How can you be radically generous with what you've been given by God? Is this going to be easy? Not at all. It's so hard to loosen our grip on the things that we think that we need to feel happy or to feel comfortable. In the moments when it's difficult, I want to encourage you to remember just how generous God has been to you. It's all a gift coming down from the Father. God has extended undeserved generosity to each and every one of us, and in doing so, He has chosen you to be generous. The question is, will you choose to make generosity one of your daily rhythms? Will you loosen your grip on the things you think you own and start recognizing that everything is a gift? Will you choose to live a life of generosity?
What a timely word from Aaron. You know, I really want to be described as a truly generous person with everything that God has entrusted me with. And to be honest, I have to keep working at that.
Yeah, and hopefully this gives you plenty of opportunities for great conversations in your life group to process and work through what it looks like to live a generous life.
You guys are doing such an incredible job at leaning into the Chosen Challenge. Don't stop now. You have 2 more weeks to get after it.
Yeah, and have an incredible time being with your people and getting real about what generosity looks like for you. So enjoy your time together, and we'll see you next week.